Hello, and welcome everyone as you're starting to arrive to this very special California Institute for Human Science special 30-year anniversary event. My name is Nicole Ryle, and I'm the Director of Development and Public Programs here at CIHS. CIHS Enlighten is the sector of our institution that offers certificate programs, continuing education, and community offerings, and we are delighted tonight to continue our 30-year anniversary series. Throughout this year, we have been celebrating our 30 years by hosting distinguished and inspiring guests who are doing notable work and research in the mind, body, spirit fields. These events are made possible by your donations, and we thank you so much for your support. You can donate to our super convenient text code listed right behind me, or by clicking the link in the text box that I'll provide. Please stay tuned towards the end of our program tonight to learn more about our upcoming events and how you can stay involved with our vibrant and growing community. And now I would like to turn it over and introduce our CIHS president, Dr. Thomas Brophy. Thomas?
Thanks so much, Nicole.
Yes.
So, welcome to this very special California Institute for Human Science live event. I'm Thomas Brophy, president of CIHS. I'm just extremely delighted to be able to introduce tonight's two featured presenters. Their volume, Metatheory for the 21st Century, subtitled Critical Realism and Integral Theory in Dialogue, is a really extraordinary event in itself, and it's very much connected with CIHS's mission and the philosophy of CIHS's founder, Dr. Hiroshi Motoyama, too. Critical realism. When I was teaching the course at CIHS called Foundations of Integral Studies, I included the work of the founder of critical realism, British philosopher Roy Bhaskar. And I opined to my students how I see critical realism as the most important advance in the philosophy of science in 300 years, since David Hume. Roy Bhaskar is a co-editor of this volume as well, together with our two presenters, posthumously, sadly, because Roy passed away during the process of completing this series of books. Critical realism distinguishes between the real and that which is observable. And in so doing, it radically expands the field of view of science to include just the types of forefront research areas that are CIHS's mission. That foundations course integrates critical realism with Ken Wilber's integral theory, and importantly, with Dr. Hiroshi Motoyama's work, Being and the Logic of Interactive Function, book I can plug right here because I happen to have it. And this coming fall quarter at CIHS, that Foundations in Integral Studies course will be taught by one of tonight's presenters, Dr. Nicholas Hedlund, who received his PhD from University College London, where he worked closely with the philosopher Roy Bhaskar himself. Nick also has 2 master's degrees in philosophy and religion and in psychology. He's director of the Eudaimonia Institute, a social innovations laboratory. He has been an exchange scholar at Yale University, executive director of the Integral Research Center, and organizer of the Critical Realism Integral Theory Symposia series, which I believe started taking place in Luxembourg. His work has appeared in numerous anthologies and peer-reviewed journals, and he has received several academic and scholarly honors, and now he will be teaching at CIHS. Our other presenter is very well known to CIHS community. Dr. Sean Esbjorn-Hargens is CIHS's Director of Integral Noetic Sciences Programs and Dean of Integral Education. His PhD, focusing on philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness, is from CIIS. He was executive editor of the Journal of Integral Theory and Practice. He's founding editor of the SUNY book series in integral theory. He has very many credits that I will just encapsulate, that he is a recognized global leader in the application of integrative thinking and research methodologies in academic and industry contexts. So now the main event, and I'll pass it on.
So, welcome everyone. It's great to be here. And it's great to be here with you, Nick. Nick and I have been collaborating in this space for a long time, going way back to our JFK University days. And it's great to see Jordan attending tonight. So thanks, Jordan, for being here. And I'm just, I just really touched, Nick, to have your partnership and your friendship, and now you as a fellow doctorate colleague. So congratulations.
Thanks so much, Sean.
Recently. So there's a number of themes. Let me just share screen here that we're going to be exploring tonight. The meta-crisis is one. The Anthropocene, which in some ways is very much kind of wrapped up with the meta-crisis and arguably kind of one and the same, but some important differences. And then just integrative metatheory, or big picture perspectives, as it's referred to at the title of the new book that's out that we'll be getting into today. I want to just kind of build on what Dr. Brophy shared about, CIHS as being, not only a Wilbur-friendly institute, but a Bhaskar-friendly institute, and just an integrative metatheory-friendly institute in general. Many of you are aware of my time at John F. Kennedy University when I developed and ran two master's level programs, one in integral psychology and one in integral theory. And it was always my dream to, create or build, either at JFK or somewhere else, a PhD program focusing on integrative metatheory. And I'm just so happy to be at CIHS, where I've been for the last 2 years, and to be doing that with the Integral Noetic Science program. So I want to just say a little bit about it, because it's a unique program on the planet, because it's diving into the topics and themes that we're exploring tonight. So it's a graduate level program, master's and PhD, and it's addressing the meta-crisis through its focus on, kind of the three elements of its namesake, right? So there's integral perspectives and the use of integrative metatheory, first, second, third person perspectives, ancient, modern, postmodern, and meta-modern perspectives, as well as the range of big picture thinkers like Wilbur and Bhaskar and Dr. Motoyama, who's the founder of CIHS, who is an accomplished integrative thinker in his own right. And then, noetic is such a great word because it allows me to include so many different aspects of consciousness in the focus and scope of the program. And, there's a number of them listed there. And then science perspectives. And I think this is one thing that really sets this program apart and distinct from many of the somewhat similar programs at other schools, is the way we're bringing in mixed methods, indigenous and esoteric methods, philosophy of science, yogic and subtle energy research, the science of well-being, the focus on various forms of realism, social impact metrics, such as the 10 capital model that I've developed, and then just brain science in general. We have a lab on campus that has EEG machines and heart rate variability machines and a variety of other instruments to measure and document consciousness, as well as subtle energies in the body. So there's a lot of unique ways in which, we're providing advanced graduate level coursework, so that students can work at the intersection of science, consciousness, embodiment, and what I like to call weirdness. And I, and for those of you who've been tracking my more recent explorations, it's like, I don't think you can approach weirdness with anything less than an integrative metatheory, right? So it's just another opportunity to apply these big picture thinking to some of the hardest, thorniest questions and issues on the planet, or even off planet, if you will. And then there's also a focus on individuals, faculty and students, developing their own training in and practices in spiritual traditions and contemplative traditions. There's a focus on groundbreaking, edgy mixed methods research. So, there's a lot of innovative things happening with research methodology and we're really wanting to be at the forefront of that, informed by integral methodologies. And then, we're cultivating global consciousness through grappling with the big questions. And we're, by drawing on different models of realism, critical realism being one of those, we're wanting to explore and pioneer new models of reality, because I think to really address the meta-crisis and get through the Anthropocene in a somewhat, intact, mode, I think we need expanded models of reality. And so this is one place where we're exploring all of that. So with that, I want to turn it over to Nick, who's going to, give you a bit of a background on the symposium series that kind of led to the creation of a number of books, which I'll then kind of, tee up and as we dive into the book under discussion tonight. So Nick.
Thanks, Sean. Great to be here, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. So yeah, I wanted to speak a little bit to where this whole book emerged from, and give you a little bit of sense of the context and history around the emergence of this book. So yeah, it started back 12 years ago now. It's hard to believe. In Luxembourg, there was a symposium that Marcus Moltz and Mark Edwards, two of our integral colleagues, organized, and they brought together leading integrative researchers from all over the world. And the intention was to facilitate cross-pollination and mutual understanding and bring all these amazing integrative meta-theorists into one room and see what happens, see what kind of interesting mutant hybrids, if you will, would emerge from this encounter. So Sean and I showed up there, and in the process, we both found ourselves in the room with Roy Bhaskar and some other critical realists like Mervyn Hartwig. And we had an amazing experience. And just meeting Roy was such a profoundly moving experience for both Sean and I, just to experience his absolutely brilliant, shining intellect and his open, generous, kind, grounded, humble heart was really powerful for both Sean and I. We both made a really strong connection with Roy at that symposium, and we stayed in touch. And Roy read some of Sean's work and some of my work, and we began dialoguing, and the energy felt like it wanted to go deeper and to explore some of these synergies between critical realism and integral theory, where Sean and I were more rooted at the time. And so we dreamed up this symposium series, and we organized the first symposium at John F. Kennedy University in the San Francisco Bay Area way back in 2011. And so yeah, we brought together something like 10 to 15 leading scholars from both of the camps, critical realism and integral theory. And we got together for a nice long 4-day event. And we started early in the morning, and we just delved super deep. And it was, the energy in the room was amazing. It was super inspiring, and just, there was a lot of aliveness and curiosity, and even a little magic in the room. And so this first symposium was kind of the honeymoon phase, and both sides were just kind of enamored at the interaction and all the generativity happening therein. And it was a beautiful thing, and people started to write papers and think through some of the issues about how these two approaches might work together. And there was this incredible auspicious sense of complementarity between these two approaches, almost like this perfect yin yang. They're both these incredibly potent big picture visions of reality, but they approach reality in very different ways. They were deeply complementary, and so it inspired a whole series of symposia, and we realized there was a lot of really interesting work to be done there. And I started to get inspired myself to do my PhD research along these lines. So yeah, then a couple years later at the Integral Theory Conference in San Francisco, we had another symposium and it was great. We started really honing in on the critiques. Most of us had read the corpuses of each of the schools at that point, and we could really start to hone in on what are the key issues here. And then we all started writing chapters for the first volume that Sean will speak to later, which was called Metatheory for the 21st Century, which was more theoretical in its focus. And then we all read each other's chapters in these very pointed, nuanced critiques of the other school and so forth. And we organized another event at University College London in 2014, and we got together there, and the honeymoon phase was over at that point. There was a lot of charged dialectic happening, and there was palpable tensions in the air, and the emotions ran high at times. In fact, on the last day, I looked around the room at one point, and there were several people in tears. But it was a beautiful thing of these humans struggling to understand what it means to be human at this time, and how we can address the urgent planetary crises. And there was a lot of passion, but that really was a deeply generative process. And then finally, we had the last symposium, which was held in the San Francisco Bay Area, the Integral Theory Conference in 2015. And there we really started to develop some of the syntheses, some of the understandings of how these two schools could be put together in new, powerful ways, and potentially even finding a higher order synthesis of these two approaches. And one of the things that emerged in that symposium was this understanding of these 6 different positions, the various scholars and folks that were involved in the symposia series came to. And I'm not going to go into all the nuances of those positions, but as you can see in the number 1, the CIR, there's kind of a spectrum from full synthesis, kind of the Hegelian synthesis, these things all fit together in this perfect, neat and tidy way, to number 5. Now, these two approaches are incommensurable. There's no way that they can really come together. It's not even a really useful conversation. And then the 2 through 4 represent kind of different positions on a spectrum or a continuum of commensurability and incommensurability. So that's a little bit of the context of where this all emerged from. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean to speak to the 3 books.
Great, thanks, Nick. And before we move to that, I'll just give a shout out to Rob Smith, who I saw was with us tonight. Rob was leading the Integral Institute at the time when we were initiating this initial symposium, and the Integral Institute funded that first symposium and played a role with supporting and funding some of the subsequent gatherings. So II and Rob's leadership were really instrumental in helping to create this opportunity to fly these like 40 people, 20 folks from critical realism and 20 folks from integral theory to come together for that first multi-day gathering, kind of all expense paid trip to bring these two communities of practice together. And so that was a huge expense, and it really kickstarted a multi-year conversation as Nick described and will be presenting tonight. So thanks, Rob, for your support and leadership through those years. So there's 3 books. There's and I'm referring to them as book 1, which is the Metatheory for the 21st Century, and then you can see book 2 is also known as volume 1. So this is where it gets confusing, right? You can't have 2 integral metatheorists like create 3 books without creating kind of different orders of complexity among the 3 volumes. So book 2 is volume 1 and book 3 is volume 2, and that's because volume 1 and 2 are focused on applications of kind of the dance and synergy of these 2 metatheories, and in some cases including complex thought from Edgar Morin. So it would be 3 integrative metatheories when Morin's included So there's, and the first book, as Nick was saying, was more theoretical. And, that chart that was just up that showed the 6 possible, positions of how these 2 or 3 integrated meta-theories could kind of be brought together or not. It actually turned out that there was essentially like 1 or 2 chapters for each of those approaches within this book 1. So there are some, nicely illustrated examples of what each of those positions look like in the form of actual chapters in book 1. And that came out in 2016. And what we're here tonight to celebrate and share with you is the book 2, which is volume 1 of the 2-volume set focused on applications. And that just came out about 10 days ago. And then the book 3 in volume 2, we don't have a cover yet for it, but it will look similar to, kind of the swirly smoke, that you see on both of the other books. And I have the title here, which is Integrative Responses to the Global Meta Crisis, right? So, and it's, Meta Theory for the Anthropocene, volume 2. So Nick and I are editing both of these volumes, and as you can see with the first book, Roy was part of that, as was Mervyn. So we're very excited to be sharing with you, the overview of book 2, and we'll say a little bit about book 3, and then that will be out next year. So I thought it'd be helpful because a lot of people are new to, 1, 2, or even all 3 of these integrative meta-theories. And so I can imagine the questions arising like, why these 3? Like, what do they have in common? What makes them an integrative meta-theory? So as an initial answer to that, I want to just go through these 10 criteria, which I outline in a chapter that I did in book 1. But I think it helps kind of set the stage and help you understand kind of what makes each of these 3 integrative meta-theories, 1, integrative and meta, and worth consideration in terms of kind of a dialogue or a dialectical engagement to inform one another to see what kind of additional integrative meta thinking might come out of those encounters. So all 3 of these integrative meta-theories emerged in the 70s, independently in response to global realities and challenges. And each of their founders, so Ken Wilber for integral theory, Roy Bhaskar for critical realism, and Edgar Morin for complex thought, have between 15 and 30 primary texts that they've written, and then all 3 of them have a large secondary literature that's emerged around their source material. So there's a lot of content to work with. And then each founder has, written books dealing with the arts and the humanities, the natural and social sciences, right? So all 3 of them have written a lot of different kinds of books dealing with a lot of different major categories of human knowledge. So they're all kind of transdisciplinary or post-disciplinary in that sense. And then each of the meta-theories is being applied in 35 to 50 disciplines, which is pretty impressive in itself. So people are applying these models and frameworks to, medicine and education and ecology and coaching and psychology and law and, so forth. So there's a lot of people built, and that's what makes up some of that secondary literature. And then each meta theory, as I see it, has kind of a complementary strength, which, I kind of summarize using Wilber's I, we, it framework. And I won't go into that right now, but it's detailed in one of the chapters in book 1. So there's a kind of ways in which each one serves as a counterbalance or a checkpoint on the others, so that they're all bringing something unique to the integrative meta-theory table, right? And so even though there's a lot of overlap, there's also some unique strengths and insights that each of these approaches are providing. And then they both, all 3 do a great job of talking about complexity, both kind of in a systems, horizontal sense, as well as like a developmental, evolutionary, vertical sense. They are staunch defenders of really, committed to avoiding various forms of reductionism that, modernism and postmodernism commit. And so they all 3 have developed powerful critiques of modernism, postmodernism, and kind of position themselves as kind of the next best thing, right? So it's interesting to see all 3 of them kind of see themselves as that which comes after postmodernism. And of course, any meta-modernists here tonight, might beg to differ, but that's a good conversation for us to have in just a few minutes. And then they all emphasize planet-centric and global awareness. And they also emphasize kind of individual development, maturity, enlightenment, and social emancipation, right? And I've yet to find another big picture theory, a meta theory or an integrative theory, that does all 10 of these things, right? So there's something in my mind and in my analysis that these three theories stand out because they're covering all of these elements that I've just outlined. So for me, that makes them worth additional study and exploration of how they're similar and how they're different and how we might engage them to develop our own complex, integrative meta thinking so that we can develop applications for the meta crisis. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Nick, who's going to talk about the meta crisis.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, so as Sean said, these approaches, critical realism, integral theory, complex thought, they all emerge as responses to the complex challenges that we're facing in today's world. I think that's a crucial thing to understand, why the special importance of these theories is so relevant. So we wanted to just describe the context and presence, the context that we're all experiencing profoundly and living in, which is the unprecedented complexity of the interconnected global challenges and crises that we're currently facing on the planet, including the eco-social, systemic elements, and especially the ecological crisis, and all the rich dimensions of that, from crossing our planetary boundaries to climate change, and many other facets of the ecological crisis, to the technological challenges that we're facing in terms of emergent technologies and deliberative design issues relative to exponential technology development and so on. And then also the ethical crisis that we're facing just in terms of unprecedented levels of inequality, and many other aspects of ethical crisis that we're facing. And also the existential crisis that we're facing. I think there's a mood that can be felt, and it's symptomatic in the context of mass shootings and opioid epidemics and things like this that point to a psychology of psychospiritual exhaustion and confusion and despair and meaninglessness and so on. And then there's the epistemic crisis, the deep confusion about how to make sense of what is even happening in our world to begin with, and how do we even identify what are the issues that we're dealing with and how best to respond to them, and even can we even agree that the world is in a crisis or a meta crisis. So these are all really potent aspects of the world situation that we're facing. Back in 2015, Sean and I were sitting around in the Meta Integral office in Sebastopol, California, and we were reflecting on some of these notions of the poly crisis and a crisis of perception, and all these concepts that have been articulated by various scholars and practitioners over the years. And we didn't feel quite satisfied with any of the articulations. The poly crisis was probably about the closest one that resonated for us. But we felt like there's something missing, there's something deeper there. And so we started reflecting on it, and we developed this idea of the meta crisis. And that term seems to have found some resonance in the world, and it seems to be floated around out there a lot, because I think it captures the sense of holism of what we're facing, that all these crises are not siloed, they're not separate, they're actually deeply interconnected, causally interdependent. they're all linked together in profound ways. And so, this idea that all the crises we're facing can better be understood as a singular meta-crisis, and that this meta-crisis poses deep existential risks and profound opportunities, practical and spiritual opportunities for humanity. So that's really, what we're dealing with here. So we started to develop this idea of the meta-crisis as an emergent meta-system that has that's depth stratified, meaning that it has root causes and actualized symptom events, and then various construals or perspectives about those symptoms and causes, and that all that is happening in all the dimensions of reality. So it's a pan-dimensional realism. And this way of conceptualizing it, we feel, implies a profound anti-reductionism and is a deep defense of the holism of the situation that we face. And so we argue that an adequate understanding of the situation that we're in requires this kind of holism and multi-dimensional nuance that only can really be developed through drawing on these integrative meta-theories. So the meta-crisis, as we understand, it's kind of like the myth of the Hydra in Greek mythology, where the Hydra was this multi-headed beast, and Hercules comes and he tries to slay the dragon. He cuts off one head and two heads grow back, cuts off another head and two heads grow back. And that, I think, is an apt allegory for reductionistic, hyper-specialized understandings and interventions with regards to the meta-crisis. And so what we're really trying to do with these meta-theories is to get at the belly of the beast, to develop the understandings that can coordinate our responses and help us understand what are the deeper root causes and what are the complex ways in which they are networked, and to try and develop integrative responses to the global meta-crisis, and also to try and really hone in on what are the root causes. And one of the things that we've noticed, in that process is that the meta-crisis on the deepest level, like the nature of the meta-crisis, appears to be an existential and epistemic crisis. In other words, even though there's eco-social and ethical dimensions as well, that the existential and epistemic dimensions of the meta-crisis, how we make sense and meaning in relation to the meta-crisis, in some ways are the most fundamental aspects. They supervene on the other aspects. So we want to highlight that, if our shared capacity to make sense of reality and what is happening in the world is broken, if we can't see what's happening and intersubjectively verify it, then there's virtually no chance that we will be able to effectively address the meta-crisis at scale. So likewise, without a new vision and ontology of ourselves and an understanding of who we are and our place in the cosmos, then we're unlikely to muster the deeper sense of spiritual calling, the sense of ultimate significance that can give us the motivation and the passion to develop the best sense-making that we can, and to wield that with wisdom to try and help the planet flourish. So, in short, the epistemic sense-making crisis and the existential meaning crisis are at the heart of the meta-crisis. And integrative meta-theory, we feel like, is a way to try and tap into the deep codes that have been written on that level of how we make sense of the world, the stories that we tell about who we are, and to try and rewrite those codes in a way that steers the planet towards flourishing. Sean?
Great. Thanks, Nick. So one of the things that emerged, I didn't know if you were just in deep thought with another important or if I could take over. So be sure to clue me in.
All right.
So one of the things that emerged over these 4 symposium that we had, that occurred over a 6-year period, and then there have been additional years of authors working on chapters and various conversations and collaborations happening. Is how do you respond? How as Nick was saying, the first few years was kind of exciting, this honeymoon phase of comparing our theories and getting to know each other's theories. But then at a certain point, we really wanted to make a difference. And how do we apply these theories? How do we make applications that are informed by these theories in a way that really address the meta-crisis? And so what does meta-praxis look like opposed to meta-theory, right? So what does it look like when you place these theories into action? And one of the interesting things that emerged through the course of the symposium was realizing that, in some ways, this was a unique experiment of having 2 very robust communities of practice coming together over many years, 6+ years, and really being in deep dialogue with each other and trying to appreciate similarities, trying to identify differences, trying to critique each other. And, as Nick said, it got pretty heated at a few points. And, even meta-theorists can, get really intense. And so as Nick and I were working on book 2, volume 1, the book we're presenting tonight, we were reflecting on this kind of unique experiment and realizing that more experiments like this need to happen in the world, right? We need more and more communities of practice that have integrative sensibilities or drawing on different, domains of knowledge to be able to get together for extended periods of time and collaborate in a deep way. So we started to reflect on what were the unique elements that allowed this experiment that we were part of for 6+ years to be so successful. And so there's a whole section in the introduction of volume 1 that outlines this. I spend 5 or 6 pages kind of describing what I mean by these 6 points. Tonight I'm just going to mention them in passing just to give you a feel for kind of another aspect of what the book represents, because both volume 1 and 2 are about applications, how do we apply these ideas to the meta-crisis. So the first is around dialogue and dialectical engagement. So learning to talk to each other, learning to be transformed by one another, and and giving up identities around your particular views of your meta theory, and and areas you thought were strong that are now being pointed out might not be as strong as you thought they were, and just that whole kind of process of kind of doing shadow work at a high meta theory level, because even theories have shadows, right? And the proponents of theories, often embody and, kind of perpetuate those shadows. So there's something about this kind of deep, mutual, transformative encounter. Another layer to that is learning to speak each other's meta-theoretical language. There are a lot of terms that Wilber and Bashkar use, for instance, that initially sound like they're the same term, but then when you get into it, there's really different meanings, or there's different terms that have similar meanings. So it's kind of like Americans and Australians talking to each other. They think they both speak English, but then certain statements or comments, you start realizing, wait, I'm not sure I know what they are meaning, because the way they're using that word is really different than what I would imagine, or even the Brits. I remember being an exchange student in my sophomore year in high school, and being in a British school and telling everyone I was super excited to show them my pants tomorrow because I'd gotten this new pair of pants that I thought were really cool. Well, in England, pants refer to underwear. So everyone was a little aghast as to why the American exchange student was telling them that he was going to come to school tomorrow and show them all his underwear, when I should have been saying my trousers. I can't wait to show you my trousers, right? So there's something important about learning to speak each other's language, and as Nick mentioned, that requires reading the source text, and the secondary literature, and having debates and discussions. And then as part of that, you really need hermeneutic and ontological generosity. You have to give each other the benefit of the doubt, right? Like the conversation's not going to get very far if you're positioned off and you're contracted, or you're nitpicking, or you're trying to like find the blind spots or the holes, in each other's theories. Like you really have to start from a place of generosity, intellectual generosity, philosophical generosity, interpretive generosity, and even ontological generosity. And I think one way that I understand that is like, recognizing that Roy Bhaskar has thought really deep and hard about the points he's making, as has Ken Wilber, right? And so they probably have arrived at these points and these distinctions and these terms and these concepts through a deep ontological consideration around the nature of reality. And so if you're taking issue with one of them, you probably should, do your homework and really kind of make sure that the issues you're bringing to bear on those are informed and thoughtful, and not just straw man arguments, instead do the strong man argument instead of the straw man. And then we also found that having members from kind of each, side of the aisle, as it were, the critical realists, integral theorists, and there were also complex thought, advocates, and then there were people who were somewhat meta-theoretically agnostic. They didn't identify with being in either the Wilber camp or the Bhaskar camp, but they were interested in integrative meta-theory in general. And so we found having people, work together in mixed teams, meaning, people from representing the different meta-theoretical, perspectives, have them work together on projects around education, on economic analysis, on climate change, that was really important. And it really helped make it real in a whole new way, as you can imagine. And then there, was the importance of epistemic reflexivity at both an individual and a team level, and just, continually being willing to, be self-reflective, look at what you're saying, how you're saying it, why you're saying it, the deeper kind of things at risk, with why you're feeling defensive or reactive to different positions, or feeling misunderstood, and because there was a lot of that at different points. And then lastly, the cultivation of philia, one of the forms of Greek love, essentially means friendship, so eating meals together, laughing, spending time together, outside of the symposium, or the formal sessions, that played a big role with creating the context and the opportunity to really connect at a heart-to-heart level. So I wanted to just share with you kind of some of the insights we got about, how communities of practice can come together and engage each other on this kind of meta-theoretical level. So with that, I want to turn it over to Nick with his discussion of Meta-Theory 2.0.
Great, thanks, Sean. Yeah, so I wanted to say a little bit more about what meta-theory is, and connect a little bit to what I said about the meta-crisis and the relevance of meta-theory for addressing the meta-crisis. So the scale and complexity of the meta-crisis necessarily demands new modes of integrative interdisciplinary scholarship that can effectively weave together understandings of all these dimensions into a holistic understanding of what the meta-crisis is. So in the book, we make the case that integrative meta-theory can be updated, revisioned, made relevant, immunized from modern and postmodern critiques, and shown to be an indispensable cultural resource for addressing the meta-crisis. So integrative meta-theory 2.0, as we call it, has several functions. First off, it's integrative. It can manage the vast complexity of the multidimensionality of the meta-crisis. It can integrate insights across all the disciplines of the humanities, the sciences, etc. And so that's an incredibly powerful function of meta-theories. It's just its sheer capacity to bring coherence to the radical complexity that we're facing. It also has a realist function. especially vis-a-vis the philosophy of science and critical realism, to reinvigorate and revindicate the idea of reality in a time when, in an era of post-truth, right? Where the very notion of truth is in question, and to provide a rigorous foundation to reinvoke the idea that there is truth, even if we're all individually fallible in how we understand what that truth is. That we're trying to come into resonance with reality, with the reality principle, as best we can. It also has an emancipatory function. It can help us identify the real root causes of social pathologies, and then dialectically devise interventions that can support real emancipation. And then there's also a very important visionary function of meta theory, in that it's like a concrete utopianism, where meta theory can help us envision new possibilities for social life, for how we can live together in better ways, in ways that are transcending the core problematics of the meta crisis, in ways that are more sustainable and ethical and meaningful, beautiful. So meta theory can help us really think through plausible utopias that are working within the constraints that are given, and that by doing so we can start to devise real world socio-ecological interventions, artifacts, technologies, systems that can start to bring those to life and enact them in a real way. So essentially, integrative meta theory 2.0 could be understood as an advanced scaffolding for collective sense making and existential meaning making. In other words, helping us understand who we are and why we're here in a deep level, that can help guide us through the stormy waters of the meta crisis. So yeah, understanding meta theory also as this kind of architectonic generator function of worldviews. Where do worldviews come from? The worldviews that are guiding the way we're designing the social and economic and technological landscape. And again, we see meta theories as kind of deep code that undergirds worldviews, the worldviews from which we design social systems that affect the ecological systems that we're living in. And so if we want to affect deep socio-ecological transformation, make the world more sustainable and more ethical, we have to go back to looking at the worldviews and the meta theories that underpin those worldviews and see how we can refine them. So, as we developed this idea of meta theory 2.0, we saw that there are different inflections in meta theory. People were using the word meta theory in very different ways. And at first that was confusing. Oh, critical realism is a meta theory, but it's really a philosophy of science. And then integral theory is a meta theory, but it's really this synthesis of scientific findings across fields. And so we started to sort this out, and we came up with the idea of meta theory alpha and meta theory beta. Meta theory alpha being more of a meta philosophy, meta theory beta being more of a meta science, meta theory alpha being more of a philosophy of science, meta theory beta being more of a second order science, a science of science. And so I won't go through all of those, but we saw that these two different modes, a more philosophical and a more scientific mode, go to the next slide, Sean, that they fit together deeply. Roy Bhaskar calls this the twin screwing of philosophy and science. Like they're syncategorigmatic. So that means that they're categories or approaches to reality that necessarily go together. It doesn't make sense to have science without philosophy. It's incoherent and unintelligible. It doesn't make sense, and vice versa. So this next slide sort of shows the relationship between meta-theory alpha at the bottom, which is we can understand as a kind of philosophical underlaboring or a philosophy of science that sets the foundation for the possibility of science itself. It clarifies and makes intelligible what science is and how it's working, and solves a lot of internal contradictions that can otherwise show up in science, in empirical science. So the next level is empirical science, understanding all these different objects, getting data points about different facets of the world via different disciplines. And then moving up one level to meta-theory beta, the second order empirical theory, or scientific overlaboring. It's like looking at all those findings from all these different fields and going, wait, how do all these things fit together? What are the patterns? What are the principles that are linking these things? So we can actually arrive back at a big picture vision or understanding of reality that we can then move from. Next slide, Sean. And so then we also saw that in addition to meta-theory alpha and beta, there's a synthetic mode that weaves these things together that's reflective, that these things necessarily go together for them to be coherent. And so that was this idea of meta-theory gamma, which is at the top of the pyramid there. Meta-theory alpha, critical realism is more of a meta-theory alpha. Integral theory is more of a meta-theory beta. And then a lot of what we've been exploring in this symposium process, in these books, and in my own PhD research is, what does a meta-theory gamma that synthesizes these two approaches into a higher order understanding? What does that look like? And so we call that meta-theory gamma. Next slide. And then we saw that we kind of coded all the different kinds of meta-theory that we saw happening out there in the world. And so we found these subtypes of meta-theory alpha and beta. And yeah, I won't go into that right now, but just to give you a sense that there's, we developed a typology of these different approaches. Next slide. And so, yeah, in short, we're trying to re-vindicate this idea of big picture thinking, which has been poo-pooed in the academy and thought of as not something that's really legitimate for sophisticated thinkers. But Sean and I are sitting here going, we're not going to make it through the meta crisis here in a good way without a big picture understanding. And so we've really got to re-vindicate this idea of big picture understandings and their importance for developing a more beautiful and healthy way of being on this planet. Sean?
Great. Thanks, Nick. As folks are getting a great taste of Nick's doctoral research, and and he's working on his book, and I'm very excited for him to be able to kind of share that with us, where he goes into great detail with kind of all the different ideas he just outlined. It's essentially a meta theory of meta theories. And so wrapping up here, just have just 2 more slides to show, and then we're gonna open it up to Q&A. Though I think we're gonna take a break in just a moment, and then Nicole will guide us with that, and then people can do a bio break, and then we'll come back and have the last half hour together to engage your questions and reflections. So we've given some context and background to kind of the scholarship research, the symposium, the 3 books. I want to just highlight kind of the contents of volume 1, which we're presenting tonight, and its companion volume 2, which will come out next year. I'm not going to go through each of the chapters, but they're listed here. But I do want to highlight that there's 3 parts with the first volume, which is out now and available. I haven't gotten my copy yet, though I know some folks here tonight have already gotten it. So you got it before Routledge was able to send me my copies. So there's 3 parts, one on society and economics, one on social psychology, one on education. And they all have a preface, a forward, and afterwards. So there's a number of additional thinkers and scholar practitioners we've been able to bring in who really add some amazing material to the volumes themselves. So not only are the chapters really solid, but all these other content pieces. Nick and I were really thoughtful with who we invited to do those prefaces, forwards, and afterwards, and we were not disappointed. Everyone hit a home run with those. And then Volume 2, which is coming out next year, we have Part 4 on climate change, Part 5 on integrative research, Part 6 on religion and spirituality, and then Part 7 on what we're calling meta-integrations. And so you can see between these 7 parts, they really do cover a lot of major categories of global society and reality. And so we feel really good that together these 2 volumes do a nice job of presenting essentially 17 chapters plus the forwards, prefaces, and afterwards times 3, so that's 6. So 23 different pieces of writing by folks who have given a lot of thought to these ideas and these applications, and we feel that this is going to be a real helpful contribution to integrative meta thinking and application. So we're really happy to be here with you all tonight, and excited to get into comments and reflections. So I think that's all we got. Yeah. So I'll stop sharing, and Nicole, if you can just give us a sense of next steps, and we'll go from there.
Yes. Thank you guys so much. What an interesting and inspiring presentation, and a fascinating book. Looking forward to checking it out. And thank you all so much for your attendance and your support tonight. As you may know, CIHS is a pioneer in this mind, body, spirit integrative education, or as Sean described it, the intersection of science, consciousness, embodiment, and weirdness. I love that, Sean. So to continue being able to offer programming like this, your donation tonight makes that possible. And it allows us to host remarkable guests like our brilliant CIHS professors. So if you've already donated, thank you. And there have been some coming in throughout the night, so we really appreciate that. If you haven't, you can follow the link in the chat box. I'm going to post it right now, or you can text CIHS to the number 801-8001 and help us reach our goal for tonight. And then we're also super excited to announce that CIHS will offer a gift of Nick and Sean's new book to the highest donation received. So a little incentive for you guys. So please help us support us by sending in your donation now. And then at this time, we will open up the Q&A. So you can type your questions into the Q&A chat box, or you can use the raise hand function. There was a question at the beginning. If you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you. Okay, so we will open it up to Sean, Nick, and Thomas, and please let us know your questions. There's already a few in the Q&A box.
Great.
Let's see.
Nick, you might click on the Q&A tab just so you can see the questions. There's a couple that I think you're particularly qualified to answer. The one from John. Hey, John, Azizi. And maybe even also the big history one from J. Paul.
Great. Yeah. Let's start with John Azizi. Hey, John. Glad you're here, man. Thank you. So yeah, John asks, can you please clarify the meanings of under-laboring and over-laboring? So let's start with under-laboring. So yeah, I believe this actually, Roy Bhaskar talks about philosophical under-laboring as clearing away the rubbish. So the philosophical rubbish that then sort of taints all subsequent endeavors. So if we're talking about philosophy of science, if we haven't got our foundations right, if we haven't developed a solid ontology and epistemology, then we're going to see those problems ripple into our scientific practice, and we're going to find incoherencies between our scientific theory and our scientific practice, as Roy Bhaskar has articulated with regards to positivism and post-Popperian philosophies of science and so forth. So philosophical underlaboring is really about clearing out the muck and setting the foundations right, getting it clear, coherent, intelligible, and serious. The other part of it is this idea of philosophical seriousness, that a good philosophy should be self-reflexive. It should be coherent with itself. One should be able to walk their talk. You shouldn't propose to go out to leave the house through the second story window unless you're prepared to actually walk out the second story window, which is a famous example from David Hume that Roy Bhaskar loved to hammer on. So I think that kind of covers the philosophical underlaboring. It's essentially synonymous with developing a solid ontology, epistemology, axiology, philosophical foundation that's coherent. And then overlaboring in this context refers to looking at all the different scientific findings, the empirical scientific findings, from the coherent worldview of a coherent philosophy of science or metaphysics, right? And then using that approach, the philosophical principles and foundational claims about reality to sift through all the data, all the findings from all the different divergent disciplines, and try and link them together into overarching understandings of reality. And the two kind of go together in the sense that when you're doing the overlaboring, you're deploying the philosophical underlaboring, and that's also helping you clear muck from problematic interpretations of science that are incoherent and so forth. So the two kind of go together, and together they form this big picture understanding that can be useful. So is that helpful, John?
Great. So let's respond to J. Paul. J. Paul has two questions. I think they kind of go together. How does this relate to big history studies? And then does it connect with whole systems work of Capra? Yeah, in many ways it does connect with all of that. Those are meta views. They have integrative elements to what they're doing. They don't qualify as integrative meta theories, in the ways that we've been articulating tonight. So I think that would be an interesting thing to kind of go into and explore more at some point of, why those approaches aren't necessarily full integrative meta theories, and how they might expand and develop themselves to become more fully integrative meta theories. I think we would include all of that in our integrative meta theories. Though Wilber's developed some pretty powerful critiques of, Capra's, systems theory approaches, and the ways in which it can be surprisingly reductive. And I think that, points to, some of what Nick was just talking about with the under and over laboring, and, and how, sometimes even holistic approaches like, whole systems work can actually, at the end of the day, not be as holistic as you think it is, because of some of its surprisingly materialist assumptions that are kind of baked into it in ways that you are not always obvious initially, because we get kind of enamored with the ways in which it's being more holistic and including more, but some of the some elements that are problematic are kind of still within those frameworks and assumptions. And I think that's true with big history. I think big history in some ways tends to be very materialist in its orientation. It doesn't include esoteric histories. It doesn't include indigenous histories so much, as what I've seen, though you might know more. But I think there's a particular approach to big history that maintains certain modernist and postmodernist assumptions around history that I think would be cast in a slightly larger context in an integrative meta theory framework. So Nick, anything you would add to, my initial pass at kind of responding to some of what J. Paul's asking about here?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Yeah, I think it's actually a good example of what you're saying of philosophical underlaboring, right? And then the possibility of scientific overlaboring, where you look at a field like big history or various inflections of systems theory and so on, and you can see that it's got baked into it certain philosophical category errors that from the beginning that are continuing to cause problems, right? And so yeah, I think that I would add that, and then also in our approach and my approach in my PhD research, within the context of getting the philosophical underlaboring right and sort of not confusing interiors with exteriors or reducing one to the other, for example, you can start to apply systems approaches and complexity science approaches to the understanding of human interiority in non-reductionistic ways. And that's something I'm really interested in, and that we've developed a bit and hope to develop more.
Okay. And John Cole, great to have you with us tonight. John's asking how he gets a signed copy, with both of our signatures. So I think, John, we would just have to mail it between ourselves and then mail it to you. But, that takes a little time, but it's absolutely doable. So just reach out to us and we can figure out how to coordinate that. And then Lynn's asking about, please talk about the weirdness aspect. Well, the weirdness aspect is just, it's two things. One, it's in the MA PhD program, Integral Noetic Sciences. That program, which takes an integrative meta-theoretical approach to a lot of topics, one of those topics being weirdness, right? The paranormal, the range of anomalous experiences that people have as part of our approach to, the study of consciousness. And making room for the experiences people have that don't always fit into kind of more traditional understandings of the nature of reality. And so the MA PhD program, kind of brings an integrative meta-theoretical approach to those topics. So for instance, in the fall, I'm teaching a course on varieties of anomalous experience. So we're looking at, each week kind of a different type of anomalous experience, like an out-of-body experience. 1 week we look at the literature and research around that. We look at psychedelic experiences and the kinds of experiences people have on different types of psychedelics and DMT. And then we look for kind of what are the patterns and similarities across those experiences, and how might we understand what people think of as weird, these very different types of experiences that don't always conform to consensus reality. How do we make sense of that? So I bring kind of an integrative approach to that. The book, that we've been talking about tonight, doesn't go into that, but volume 2, which is coming out next year, there's a chapter that I have in that volume where I apply an integrative meta theory to, the study of UFOs and ET encounters, and how might we develop a integrative meta science to look at that topic, in a more kind of scientific way than what has been done historically. So hopefully, Lynn, that gives you a sense of kind of where the weirdness is in all of this. Though I think integrative meta theory is pretty weird just in and of itself, right? Because it's so complex and multifaceted, and and I'm sure others think it's weird too. But you all are a little weird for coming out to hear us speak. And then let's see. And so Nick, maybe you can respond to Chris's question around Zach and Hans's, chapter on getting theory into public culture and kind of what that looked like.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris, for the question. I love the chapter that Zach and Hans did. I think what Zach and Hans did was particularly inspiring. So Zach and Hans met through the Symposia series, and then they learned that they both lived in the Boston area. And so they started meeting up and having these beer summits, as they call them, philosophical beer summits. And so they'd hang out and really get into the weeds with all these questions. And they really found an inspired synergy in their work together. And so they decided to take on this project of writing op-eds and getting them published in various newspapers that were deploying integrative meta theories, critical realism, and integral theory, but completely in the background. So they're op-eds that don't mention anything about critical realism or integral theory, but the perspectives that they're offering, the interventions that they're arguing for example, were all deeply informed by the scaffolding of integral theory and critical realism and other approaches too. So that chapter details that and has some of the actual op-eds that they published in there, and then just describes their process of this collaborative meta theorizing, and then trying to actually carry that out, actualize that in terms of a strategic intervention through op-eds. So it's pretty awesome and pretty inspiring. And yeah, you also asked when the 2023 volume 2 will be out. We don't know the exact date, but definitely sometime in 2023, hopefully in the earlier part of the year.
Wonderful, Daniel, to have you with us tonight. And you're asking about, some real world examples of businesses or NGOs that are offering products or services informed by these perspectives. So Nick, maybe if there's any examples you can think of, and then Daniel also asked, about examples of the meta impact framework with the 10 capitals, and so I can speak to that. But Nick, any examples of businesses or NGOs kind of using integrative meta theory that you can think of?
I think you'd be more apt for answering that.
Well, there's the interesting work of the meta-modernists, and some of the, kind of political party stuff that's happened in Europe, so I think that could count as one example of some interesting, real world activity that's, informed by some of this kind of thinking. In terms of, the 10 capitals, I know Claudia, my colleague at Meta Integral, is on the call tonight, so she could also speak to this. But yeah, there's, a number of organizations we've worked with, with the 10 capitals. I've just put in a proposal to a couple companies, considering using the 10 capitals in their work. We've worked with, intentional communities. We've worked with hospitals. We're worked with, app developers. And in all those examples, it's, the individuals and the businesses generally recognize that they're working with 3 or 4 of the different types of capital, such as financial capital, human capital, natural capital, social capital. But they realize that there's other kinds of value and capital that they're wanting to include. And so they see the work that we've done around the meta impact framework as kind of a meta integrative model that allows them to see more accurately the forms of value and value exchange that are occurring, informally and formally within their organization, within their system. And one of the things that Claudia and I have, noticed over and over again when doing different kinds of analyses of organizations, using the 10 capital model, is all 10 forms of capital are present in the system, even if the organization's only measuring or tracking 2 or 3 of them. And so I think this is where kind of an integrative meta view helps, because it helps us zoom out and start to see kind of the links and relationships between these, different elements, from, psychological well-being to, skill sets, to social connectivity, to, financial bottom line dynamics, to, physical wellness and health capital, and so, seeing the relationships between them, because a lot of them are not linear. A lot of them are systemic relationships, so you can't just get at it in a standard linear way. But coming back to the first part of your question around NGOs and, businesses, I think part of the challenge is there aren't many examples of them using integrative meta theory to, and that's what we're hoping to be able to inspire by having these 2 volumes come out that are highlighting applications that these 20 authors have provided us in these different areas of economics and education, climate change. So because as we've been saying, we feel like we're going to be better served dealing with the meta crisis if we have more meta integrative thinking and more applications, and getting more businesses and NGOs to consider and engage some of these ideas in ways that make sense for their particular initiatives.
There is
anything to add, Thomas? Oh yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
There is the California Institute for Human Science as far as organizations applying integrative meta theories.
Mm-hmm. I would also mention the Consilience Project as a powerful example. Folks like Zach Stein are involved in that, and a lot of the work they're doing is similar to what I described with Hans and Zach. They're deploying these meta theories kind of behind the scenes and not highlighting, not leading with the idea of meta theory or integral theory or critical realism, but these resources are being deployed in service of the strategic interventions that they're pursuing.
Yeah, and the work of Perspectiva, and Thomas Bjorkman's, funded projects often have, a lot of the elements in what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Then the next question comes from Stefan, and Nick, you probably are best for this if you can read that out loud and respond.
Yeah, so Stefan says, could you please speak to the potential incorporation / manifestation of arts as you currently make sense of and imagine metatheory 2.0 / metatheory gamma, along with how that may relate to metatheory 1.0 / metatheory alpha plus beta. Thank you. That's a mouthful. Thanks for the question, Stefan. Yeah, so the arts, I feel that art plays a really important role working in synergy with philosophy and science, and like the relationship between philosophy and science, it's been overly accentuated. The distinction between them has been overly accentuated, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for incorporating art into philosophy and science, expressing the insights that are developed through integrative meta theory in the form of art, and kind of starting to integrate art, which I also tend to see, as folks like Steve McIntosh have talked about, as historically it's often more of an engine of inspiration and transformation. So you need new insight and new truths, but you also need new passion and new art. You think of the 60s and the role that Bob Dylan and the Beatles played, but you also needed a lot of the insights that the philosophers and the scientists were developing to have that overall cultural revolution. So I think for me, particularly music and visual arts can play a really important role. And I think there's a dear friend of mine and contributor to the volume, Gary Hampson. One example was he created a really inspiring musical album that was in many ways expressing a lot of the insights that he has been developing for many years through integrative meta theories. And so more things like that are kind of these integral expressions that, is it art, is it science, is it philosophy, is it all of the above? That's very interesting.
So I've just been typing and responding to some of the other questions. There's one here from Jay Paul where he's asking, when and where is the noosphere of Pierre de Chardin touched? And I started responding, but maybe Nick, you can add to this, because I was thinking the epistemic, existential, and ethical crises are all, in my mind, places where the noosphere is part of the meta crisis. But what else would you add to that response?
Well, one of the notions that we've been developing has to do with the causal power of ideas, and the coherent field of the field of ideas, or which is not the entirety of the noosphere, but it's an important part of it. And so a lot of the work with like critical realism, for example, is making an argument for the importance and causal potency of the noosphere, and how it in many ways functions as a blueprint and generator function for material technologies and social systems and so on.
Norio, hey Norio, great to have you with us tonight. Norio is asking about, what are the issues and problems we, see that remain, and that are, unexplored or unaddressed, kind of in the context of integrative meta theory, and, have we identified any common shadow or blind spots that inform the meta theories and meta theorists? So I'll just start with a few things, and then Nick, maybe you can add. I mentioned that, even theories have shadow, and so as part of my 2013 keynote at the Integral Theory Conference, I went into detail around that, and then that became the basis of the chapter that I did in book 1, where I'm kind of comparing and contrasting integral theory, complex thought, and critical realism, and arguing that they all have blind spots and theoretical blind spots, and that's why it's important to kind of bring them together into, kind of a dialogue, and my approach is to kind of synthesize them, though I recognize, not everyone necessarily thinks that's useful or advised, so there's other ways of, working with their blind spots. But I wanted to, kind of deal with the blind spots of Wilber by bringing in Bhaskar, and deal with the blind spots of Bhaskar by bringing in Moran, right? Like I found that to kind of be an interesting strategy, So, I think, Ken Wilber tends to focus on individual development, which is a strength, but then it becomes a shadow, because then he doesn't always have as a sophisticated understanding of social structures and systems and dynamics. And so I think that's where Roy Bhaskar really excels, is a deep analysis of, what needs to happen to dismantle, social structures and emancipate, people at a societal level, right? And so then as a result, some of Roy's theorizing isn't very sophisticated when it comes to individual psychology, because his strength is in kind of social analysis in many respects. So this is two just quick examples of how we often, members of the symposium, kind of found the complementarity to be really inspiring. That these meta theories were stronger as a result of drawing on some of the frameworks and analyses of the other meta theories. Nick, what would you add in terms of things that remain unexplored or unaddressed even by these integrative meta theories, which seem to kind of include it all?
Yeah, it's a great question. One thing that comes to mind for me is the work of Daniel Gortz and the metamodernists of the Noetic school in particular, and just a deep reflection on the aesthetics and the cultural sensibility that's being embodied in these meta theories, and its potential to find real resonance, to take off as a social movement that can get real traction in the world. And I think there's a lot of room for deep reflection in those regards, because in many ways, integral theory has yet to become an effective social movement, and likewise for critical realism. They're still mostly theoretical academic communities. And so, I think Daniel's work in particular provides a really interesting take on how integral theory and some of these other approaches can be rebranded and redubbed in a certain way that can actually start to make more of a difference in the world as a successful cultural movement.
So then going to a question from Jordan, how are you relating to the urgency of the moment, and how is this informing your choices around the progression of this body of work in the coming years, in whichever multiple vectors you're seeing fit and opportunities to take place? I think, again, the focus of these two volumes, volume 1 and 2, are on application. So I think that's one way we're relating to the urgency, is we're wanting to model and inspire a translation from these meta theories into, what does that look like in an applied context? What does this look like when the rubber hits the road? And to have these 2 volumes with their application examples help create a more sophisticated conversation around how do we translate integrative meta theory into applications. And also, I think this is why I had the slide around the kind of the 6 principles of meta-praxis, right? It's like, how can we inspire based on our experience and our experiment to get other communities of practice to come together with their, members and explore synergies and differences between, what they're doing, because we live in such a polarized space these days, not just politically speaking, but in so many ways. So I think we need to be inspired around how do we work together, when we have really big differences or when we have a big theory we think covers it all, and then there's another big theory, that's saying, no, I cover it all. It's like, so, we live in, really difficult times. And I suspect in many ways it's only going to get worse. And I think in that sense, integrated meta theory is only going to become more valuable. But I think because it's so abstract and it often requires so many layers of understanding to kind of, really grasp what it's pointing to at this kind of high level of thinking, I think part of the urgency is how do we make it more accessible, and how do we support people to engage it in creative ways that might be other than academic. So like the question, I think it was from Daniel, around where business and NGOs drawing on this and using it. I think that's part of the next phase, is to identify better examples of that happening, and so we can point to those, like the SDGs. Like I find the SDGs so depressing because I just feel that the whole way they're approaching it is not very effective, right? I think the impulse is very noble and exciting, but I think the execution leaves a lot to be desired, and so I think we have a lot of those examples. Nick, anything you would add to Jordan's question?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, finding more, it's urgent that we develop more powerful kind of implicit interventions that are meta-theoretically based, that are, again, not touting the meta theory, and that people can see, wow, that was just way more effective than the other way of doing it. What's the secret sauce there? And so I think the more we can develop those kinds of, really concrete examples, that's urgent. And I also feel like on the other side, the more the work of the scholar is really urgent that we get it right in terms of addressing the roots. Like, what really are the roots? So if the proposition that the meta crisis is indeed this deeply interconnected web that has these common root causes, let's really get that right. That's urgent, because otherwise we're going to be in the hydrodynamic of just creating more second and third order problems when we come in with our narrow reductionistic interventions.
Great. So I think we're kind of at time, though. I'll squeeze in just a couple quick answers here to a couple more questions, because there's so many that are left open. I just feel so excited to try and get a couple more in before Nicole cuts us off. So I'm going to respond quickly to Byron's question, and then Nick, maybe you can respond to Claudia's question about AI. And I just in general really appreciate all the great questions. So Byron's asking, can you say something more about meta theory in relationship to the esoteric systems such as Theosophy or the Urantia book? Both of those traditions and systems I really respect and I'm familiar with, and I know you are too, Byron, so I appreciate the question. And this is a lot of what I'm doing with my exostudies work, and kind of trying to develop a integrative meta theory of the paranormal and the subtle realms. And I know Nick too has spent a lot of time thinking about and writing about what does a more integrative approach to the subtle realities that Theosophy talks about, or even the larger cosmic kind of narrative that the Urantia book provides us with. So I think there's a lot of room for those kind of approaches to benefit from and be engaged with an integrative meta approach. And I know that I'm actively working in that space, and so you and I should catch up and compare notes. Nick, any initial thoughts on Claudia's question about AI?
Yeah, I would just add to your piece as an aside that Roy Boscar's parents were deep theosophists, so there's an interesting connection there to critical realism. He was deeply suffused with that whole world in his childhood. Yeah, in terms of Claudia's question about the AI, yeah, I mean, I do think that AI, if it were to be deeply ethically designed, so that's the first point, is that I think a meta-theoretical big picture understanding can help us approach the designing of AI to on the one hand mitigate the really dark potentials of where certain kinds of AI could take us that are informed by a more nihilistic form of design. But I also think that if we could apply meta theories to the design of AI, they could also feed back and help us do the meta theory in a better way. And Sean and I have, Sean and I and Jordan Luftig, actually, way back in the day, we had some ideas about how that could play out. And one notion there is this, in terms of systematic reviews and meta-analyses, AIs could be designed to do a lot of the coding work, to look at how different theories fit together and run all kinds of complex analyses that would be incredibly cumbersome to do manually without the AI. And I think that could really take our big picture understandings to the next level. But that's quite a project that would require massive amount of funding and initiative.
Great, thanks, Nick, and again, thanks everyone. So I'll turn back over to you, Nicole, and I'll try and answer as quick as I can some of the other questions in the chat before we're done.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for all the wonderful questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I was going to say too, if we didn't get to your question, or if we don't get to by the end of our time together, you can shoot us an email and we'll send it over to Nick and Sean. Yes. So thanks so much, everybody. This was a wonderful presentation, and because of your support and your attendance tonight, CIHS continues to be a leader in providing integrative education with outstanding faculty like our friends here tonight that are luminaries in their professional fields. So we thank you for joining our community, and if you're new to CIHS and CIHS events, please accept our warm welcomes. We're so happy to have you here. And we're happy to have you join us to support our mission to promote health and well-being. I think we can all say that tonight's discussion contributes to a larger global conversation of consciousness, transformation, and big picture thinking. So if you've already donated, thank you so much for helping us to reach our goal. Remember, your deduction is 100% tax deductible. So if you haven't had a chance to make it yet, please follow our links or send a text. And also, we hope you can take just 1 minute at the end of our presentation to fill out a short 1-minute survey so we can kind of cater to the wants and needs of our community. And we hope you stay in touch. We also have a few more 30th anniversary events coming up this year. The next one is going to be on September 14th as we host Dr. Richard Gold and musician Yuval Ron for their presentation, Ancient Wisdom and Modern Science, Explorations in Sound Healing. So that should be a really interesting one. And we also have an upcoming certificate course starting in September, Foundations in Shamanism. So all of this information can be found at cihs.edu, and you can learn more about all of our offerings as well as academic offerings and a little bit more about the INS program that Sean and Nick are involved in and run. So again, thank you for your generous donations. They've been coming in all night and we appreciate them. And we will look forward to connecting with you all soon. This recording or a recording of tonight's presentation will be available and we'll send it out within a week or so. So thank you to Nick and Sean, and thank you to Thomas. And again, we hope to be in touch with you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks. Have a good evening.
Yes.